Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about something that might be ruining your life, but doing it very, very quietly. It doesn't scream, it doesn't chase you down a hallway, and it doesn't wear a villain's cape. It just whispers, maybe later, and you listen. Imagine this. You're sitting on your couch. The clock's ticking louder than usual. Your laptop is 3 feet away, open, glowing like a judgmental ghost. There's a deadline somewhere in the distance, but right now, your attention is on the flickering of the ceiling light. Suddenly, it's incredibly important that you figure out why it's flickering. And that's how the day begins to slip away, like sand through buttered fingers. You probably won't survive the modern world if you keep letting this happen. That's not a scare tactic. It's the reality of a life lived under the spell of perpetual postponement. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Drop your location and your local time in the comments. I want to know where and when you're watching this from. Now, let's get comfortable and let's get started today. So there I was, mid-afternoon, staring at my to-do list like it was a hostile witness in court. Emails unanswered, laundry, staging a rebellion in the hallway, and an important writing project untouched. The weird part? I had time. I had energy. And still, I did nothing. There's a point where it's not about time or energy. It's about the mysterious mental fog that descends and makes opening a Word document feel like lifting a car with your pinky. I've been there too many times to blame it on laziness. No, this inertia feels ancient, like it's coming from somewhere much deeper. Somewhere beneath all the apps and calendar pings and caffeinated pep talks. I remember reading that Freud believed all human behavior is overdetermined, meaning we rarely do anything for a single reason. So when we delay, it's not just, I didn't feel like it. It's, I didn't feel like confronting the thing that doing this task represents. Maybe failure, maybe success, maybe being seen, maybe being not seen. There's this odd moment. Tell me if this has ever happened to you when you're just about to start. You move toward your workspace. You even open the file. Then, you go organize the spice rack instead. And here's the kicker. You feel strangely justified in doing so. I need to get into the right headspace. That's the lie you whisper to yourself. And it feels true. The human brain is incredible, right? It can run complex computations, dream up galaxies, memorize bad song lyrics forever, but still can't figure out how to sit down and start that one thing you've been avoiding. That's the paradox. What I've come to understand is this. The couch isn't the enemy. It's a symptom. The enemy is the conversation I'm avoiding. The confrontation. The vulnerability of trying something that might reveal how uncertain I really am. So I try to listen more now. When I feel the pull of procrastination, I ask, what am I trying to protect? Because make no mistake, procrastination is protection. It's your inner security guard, slamming the doors on discomfort. And the discomfort doesn't always scream. Sometimes it's subtle. The thought that you might not be as good as you hoped. Or worse, that you might be better. And then what? Expectations. Pressure. Spotlight. No thank you. Open academic debate still swirls around the true origins of procrastination. Some say it's emotional regulation. Others call it executive dysfunction. Freud would have said it's wish fulfillment wrapped in avoidance. And to be honest, all of them feel partially right. But here's what keeps me coming back to Freud's perspective. The idea that we are not fully in charge of ourselves. That under our conscious goals and plans, there's an unconscious swirl of motives, fears, and longings. We want to finish the task, yes, but we also want to remain safe, loved, unchallenged, even if that means staying stuck. Last week I put off a phone call for 4 days. It wasn't a scary call, just business. But every time I reached for the phone, my body said no. Tense shoulders, dry mouth, slight nausea, not laziness, resistance. And when I finally made the call, it was fine, almost boring, which made it even worse. I had wasted all that fear on a 5-minute conversation about payment terms. That's when I remembered something a friend once told me. The monster is always smaller than the shadow it casts. There's also this detail I love. During Freud's time, analysts would see patients daily for years. They believed that consistency was key to uncovering the patterns. In contrast, We now binge therapy like Netflix, 2 sessions, some journaling, a breakthrough meme, and wonder why we're still spinning. But change doesn't happen with insight alone. It happens when you finally move through the thing you've been avoiding and find that it didn't kill you. So the couch, yeah, it still calls. But now, when I sit down, I don't just ask, what do I feel like doing? I ask, what's behind what I feel like doing? That simple shift has helped me stand up more often. Don't get me wrong, I still scroll. I still delay. But I do it with curiosity now, not shame. And sometimes, that's enough to tip the scale. Not lazy, just haunted. That's what I remind myself on the days when I'm staring blankly at a blinking cursor, chewing on the end of a pen I haven't written anything within hours. The story we've been sold is that procrastinators just don't have the willpower, the grit, the hustle. But what if that's not true? What if what's really happening is an inner haunting, a low-frequency fear buzzing below consciousness? I'm not talking about ghosts floating through hallways. I'm talking about memories, invisible rules, the echo of someone's voice telling you not to mess it up. When Freud said the unconscious was driving most of our behavior, people scoffed. But look around. Does it really feel like you're choosing to delay that project? Or does it feel more like your body hijacks your brain, and suddenly you're elbows deep in potato chips and YouTube conspiracy videos about ancient underwater cities? I used to think I was just a time waster, a chronic slacker, until I started noticing when I procrastinated most. The pattern wasn't about the task's difficulty. It was about emotional weight. If something felt too important, too risky, too close to exposing me, it got shelved. Freud might call that repression in motion. The energy of the task didn't disappear. It just leaked out sideways into endless distraction. It's not just about not doing. It's about avoiding being judged, being wrong, being unlovable if you fail, or maybe being envied if you succeed. Some of us are haunted by different ghosts, but they all rearrange the furniture of our willpower in the same way, quietly, efficiently, and without warning. There was this one time I had to send an email pitch to someone I deeply admired. I wrote the email 3 separate times, saved each one in drafts, never sent them. You know why? Because in my head, it wasn't just a message, it was a test. If they didn't respond, I'd take it as proof I wasn't good enough. My brain was trying to protect me from that pain by just doing nothing. And somehow, that felt safer than trying. Freud described this dynamic as conflict between different parts of the psyche. The ID wants something, validation, success, connection. The ego tries to get it. But then the superego steps in with the voice of every critical teacher, ex-parent boss. It says, you? Who do you think you are? And just like that, the brakes slam. I think about that a lot now when I procrastinate. I ask, who am I afraid will see me if I try? Because it's not always fear of failure. Sometimes it's fear of exposure. Fear that once you put your best out there, it won't be good enough. Or worse, it will be. And then what? There's a weird comfort in underachieving. It lets you hold on to the fantasy of potential. As long as you haven't tried your hardest, you can always tell yourself you could be great. But once you go all in and fail, no more illusions, just results. Freud would argue that many of our avoidant behaviors exist exactly to protect those illusions. Procrastination, from Freud's point of view, is like a battleground between competing psychic forces. And the problem isn't that we're weak, it's that the battle is happening outside of our awareness. We don't see it. We just experience the paralysis. This is why telling a procrastinator to just do it is like telling someone with insomnia to just sleep. The very pressure to perform tightens a noose. What we need isn't force, it's translation. What is the fear really about? What are we trying to protect? Some psychologists today are exploring similar ideas under different names: emotional regulation, task aversion, self-handicapping. But there's still academic debate about whether procrastination is a cause or a symptom. Is it its own condition, or is it always tied to something deeper? Freud would say it's not the root, it's the flower. The root is an unmet needs, buried conflicts, split desires. I remember a friend telling me, procrastination is just your inner child throwing a tantrum in the hallway of your adult life. And I laughed, but I also winced. Because it's kind of true. That younger part of us, scared, unsure, sensitive, is still running the show more often than we like to admit. And no calendar app can fix that. Sometimes I'll sit down and try to force myself through it. No distractions, no music, just me and the screen. And the moment I start typing, a strange sadness creeps in. It's like mourning the fantasy version of myself who would have started this days ago, who would have nailed it in one go. That grief slows me down more than laziness ever could. Though, the more you shame yourself for procrastinating, the deeper the pattern gets. Because shame turns into fear, and fear triggers the same old defenses. Freud would have called this a repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to repeat old patterns, even when they hurt us, because they feel familiar. What finally started to shift things for me wasn't time hacks or productivity systems. It was compassion, talking to myself like I would a scared friend. It makes sense you're hesitating. This matters to you. You're not lazy. You're scared. That's okay. That simple act of naming the fear takes it out of the shadows. There's something oddly empowering about realizing you're not broken, just complicated. Your procrastination might not be a failure of discipline. It might be a highly intelligent, if outdated, emotional strategy. Your mind protecting you in the only way it knows how. So no, you're not lazy. You're just haunted. And maybe it's time to sit with those ghosts and ask what they're really trying to say. Some mornings, I wake up ready to conquer the world. I stretch. I hydrate. I even journal a little. But by noon, I'm playing digital dodgeball with every task I swore I'd complete. Email? Dodged. Budget review? Dodged. That creative pitch due tomorrow? Hard dodge. Freud would probably smirk and say, "Ah yes, classic ego at work, deflecting discomfort with the skill of an Olympic athlete." That's the thing no one tells you when you're trying to get your life together. Your conscious self, what Freud called the ego, isn't really running the show. It's just playing diplomat between what you want, what you fear, and what you think the world expects of you. And when things get tense, the ego reaches for its toolbox, defense mechanisms. You've heard of denial, right? That's when you pretend the deadline doesn't exist. Then there's rationalization. I work better under pressure, you say, while spiraling into an anxiety buffet of microwave popcorn and regret. And let's not forget displacement. You're mad at your boss, but instead of confronting her, you snap at the cat and reorganize your bookshelf by color. It's not that you don't want to work. It's that your mind is using everything it can to keep you emotionally safe. That's the real function of defense mechanisms. They're not bad, just overprotective. Like a mom who packs you a coat on a 90-degree day, well-intentioned, but kind of missing the moment. There was one week where I spent hours making a playlist for productive energy. The playlist itself had a spreadsheet. Categories. More talks. I even added cover art. Meanwhile, the actual project that needed my attention, completely untouched. I wasn't lazy. I was buffering, deflecting the pressure into a task that felt adjacent but emotionally neutral. Fun fact, squirrels are known to dig fake holes to confuse predators about where they've buried food. It's called deceptive caching. I do this too with tasks. I act like I'm making progress, but it's all decoy. The real work stays hidden, untouched, where it can't hurt me. Freud described this as a split between the ID, ego, and superego. The ID wants what it wants: rest, escape, pleasure. The superego wants you to be perfect, impressive, morally clean. And the ego? It's just trying to survive the day without a panic attack. So it starts swatting away discomfort like flies at a picnic. The most common defense mechanism I use is intellectualization. I'll read 5 articles about why people procrastinate instead of doing the thing I'm putting off. There's something soothing about naming the pattern, even if I don't change it. Freud would have chuckled at that. Ah, yes, the scholar of their own downfall. And there's an open academic debate about whether defense mechanisms are fixed personality traits or flexible responses to stress. Either way, when they go unchecked, they're like software running in the background, slowing everything down while you wonder why your mental battery's always low. Once I caught myself deep into a YouTube spiral on how ships are built. I don't care about ships. I don't even like water. But I was avoiding a hard conversation with a friend, and suddenly, The structural engineering of Norwegian freighters became a must-know. That's displacement. My discomfort needed a new target. And what's safer than Scandinavian boat science? The problem is, these ego tricks are self-reinforcing. Every time I avoid the hard thing, I get a little dopamine hit. Relief. That relief becomes addictive. So even though the work piles up, part of me feels clever for dodging the bullet. Never mind that I'm bleeding time. Sometimes I picture my ego like this overworked, slightly neurotic intern in my head. It's juggling flaming batons of fear, guilt, expectations, and dreams. Every time I think I'm being lazy, I try to remember it's probably just my intern trying not to get fired by the superego while the ID demands a nap and a cookie. There's also this thing Freud called reaction formation, where you act in direct opposition to how you actually feel. I once volunteered to help someone with a tedious data project, right when I had 2 looming deadlines of my own. Why? Because being helpful made me feel righteous, even as I sabotaged my own priorities. Deep down, I was scared of starting those deadlines. So I buried myself in someone else's mess instead. Even a simple act of organizing can be a defense. The desk must be perfect. The lighting must be warm, but not too warm. The keyboard must be silent yet satisfying. And then, maybe then, the muse will descend from the heavens and bless me with discipline. Spoiler, she never shows. Human intelligence is funny like that. We've built cities, sent rovers to Mars, sequenced genomes, yet can't seem to file our taxes on time. It's not because we're not smart. It's because smart people have better defense mechanisms, more creative justifications, higher level avoidance. We're not dumb. We're imaginative in all the wrong directions. Some days I catch myself mid-avoidance and just laugh. It's like watching a magic trick after you already know the secret. I'll say out loud, "Oh, I see what you're doing there, ego. Nice try." That little dose of meta-awareness doesn't always solve the problem, but it does loosen the grip. You see, defense mechanisms aren't something you cure. They're something you learn to recognize and gently disarm. Like saying, "Thanks for trying to help, but I've got this now." You don't fire the ego. You just take away its flamethrower. And you learn, slowly, that the discomfort you're avoiding isn't going to kill you. It just feels loud, heavy, but it passes. Always does. The more I let myself feel that discomfort instead of dodging it, the faster I get to the other side. There's a phrase I read once: emotions are tunnels. You have to go all the way through to get to the light. Procrastination is often us setting up camp halfway through, decorating the walls, and wondering why it's so dark. So yeah, if you're dodging something right now, you're not alone. You're not broken. You're just running a very old, very clever software program designed to keep you safe. But sometimes, you outgrow the software. And that's when the real work begins. The day was already slipping away, and I hadn't done anything I was supposed to. I was 5 episodes deep into a show I didn't even like, snacking on stale cereal, and refreshing my email as if a divine summons would arrive to yank me out of my mental quicksand. That's when I realized this wasn't just avoidance. This was indulgence. And it wasn't random. It was ritual. Freud called it the pleasure principle. The pleasure principle is simple. We seek immediate gratification. Avoid pain, grab pleasure. That's the ID in action, our primal, pleasure-seeking self. It's the toddler who lives in your psyche and wants candy for breakfast and 0 chores ever. And when you procrastinate by diving into distractions, that's your ID putting on a party hat. Let me tell you, my ID has excellent taste in diversions. It knows exactly how to keep me pacified. An hour on TikTok here, a spontaneous nap there, the occasional snack that requires no cooking and almost no chewing. In the moment, these are soothing. But later, they feel like betrayal. My own brain choosing sugar over substance. Most of our modern lives are built to cater to the ID. Our phones, apps, ads, all engineered for instant reward. Dopamine on demand. So when I sit down to work and feel resistance, it's not just inner conflict. It's the ID throwing a tantrum because I'm denying it candy. There's a human intelligence concept called delay discounting. Basically, we undervalue future rewards and overvalue immediate ones. Why write the report that pays off in 2 weeks when I can feel good now by scrolling through perfectly toasted sandwiches on Instagram? The ID doesn't care about your 5-year plan. It wants serotonin before sunset. And you know what's wild? There's a fish called the cleaner wrasse that recognizes itself in a mirror. That means it has some level of self-awareness. But even with that little spark of consciousness, the fish still chooses immediate, smaller food rewards over larger, delayed ones and experiments. So if a self-aware fish can't beat the pleasure principle, maybe I should cut myself some slack. Still, awareness doesn't equal immunity. Just because I know my ID is hijacking the wheel doesn't mean I stop it. Sometimes I even help it create these little reward structures like, if I write for 20 minutes, I can watch one video. Harmless, right? But guess who's watching the video 18 minutes in and never circling back? Freud believed that maturity meant shifting from the pleasure principle to the reality principle. That means accepting that not all desires can be immediately satisfied, and that long-term fulfillment often requires short-term discomfort. Easier said than done when your nervous system is screaming for relief. I once had a mentor say, the reason most people don't succeed isn't lack of talent. It's that they can't handle the boredom of progress. That hit hard, because the truth is, real work, the kind that builds dreams, is often deeply unsexy, quiet, repetitive, full of moments where nothing happens except your inner toddler whispering, "Why are we doing this? Let's go eat something crunchy." There's an open academic debate about whether procrastination is primarily driven by emotional regulation failure or motivational breakdown. But Freud didn't split hairs like that. He just said, the unconscious is trying to avoid pain, and your ID will hijack your entire day if it means escaping a single moment of discomfort. Once, I delayed responding to a simple email for 4 days. It wasn't complicated, just emotionally loaded. I made a mistake on a project and had to own it. Every time I opened a message to draft a reply, my chest tightened. I'd suddenly feel thirsty, then tired, then like cleaning the windows was urgent. My ID was pulling the fire alarm. Eventually, I replied. It took 90 seconds, and the response I got? Kind, supportive, barely a blip, but the suffering leading up to that moment? Immense, manufactured, avoidable, but real. What I've learned is that procrastination often starts as pleasure-seeking, but it ends as pain amplification. We avoid discomfort now and trade it for even more discomfort later. That's the deal. The ID is a terrible negotiator. It accepts short-term wins at devastating long-term cost. Some days I try to reason with it. I'll say, look, I'll give you 10 minutes of whatever you want after we write one paragraph. And weirdly, sometimes it listens. Like a toddler finally offered a cookie after brushing their teeth. Other days, though, the ID takes over completely. I've blinked and lost entire afternoons. I think the scariest thing is realizing how easy it is to live your whole life that way, drifting from one small pleasure to the next, never building anything because building requires effort, risk, uncertainty. The ID hates all three, but the ego can grow. That's the good news. The more I practice tolerating discomfort, the more my ego strengthens. It's like a muscle. Every time I say, I'll feel bored for 15 minutes so I can finish this, and then I actually do, that's a rep. Over time, I build a self who can sit in the fire without flinching. And the superego, that inner critic, it quiets down a little when the ego shows up consistently. Because the critic's power comes from your own inconsistency. When you start following through, the critic loses ammo. Freud didn't have YouTube or caffeine on demand or push notifications, but he understood the human psyche well enough to predict this mess. He knew that our quest for pleasure would often become the thing that blocks our progress. So when I notice myself watching videos about ancient civilizations instead of answering client messages, I try to pause. Not with shame, just with curiosity. What am I avoiding right now? And what's the tiniest thing I can do to shift direction? Sometimes it's as simple as standing up, walking to the desk, opening the file, and sometimes that's enough. Not always, but often, because the goal isn't to kill the ID. It's to lead it, to show it that discomfort won't destroy us. that the feeling will pass, that we are not children anymore, ruled by impulse. We are adults, barely but trying, and that has to be worth something. There's this lie I used to tell myself. I'm not procrastinating. I just want it to be perfect. Sounds noble, right? Almost admirable. Like I wasn't avoiding the task. I was respecting it, giving it time, waiting for divine inspiration to strike so I could create something worthy. But let's be honest, that wasn't reverence. That was fear in a fancy suit. Perfectionism is sneaky like that. It doesn't show up like the ID, demanding snacks and naps. It shows up in a blazer, carrying a clipboard, whispering, "You'll ruin this if you rush." It sounds responsible, mature even, but Freud would have seen right through it. Because behind perfectionism isn't high standards, it's high anxiety. For me, it started young. The gold stars, the approval, the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, message that doing something perfectly meant I was safe, loved, valued. So anything less than perfect, it wasn't just not good enough. It was dangerous. It meant rejection, or worse, disappointment. Now, I can't speak for you, but I'd rather eat a salad in the rain than disappoint someone I care about. So my brain made a little bargain. If you delay starting, you can delay failing. Genius, right? And absolutely paralyzing. I remember once spending an entire day reformatting a PowerPoint presentation. Not writing it, mind you, just changing fonts, slide transitions, colors. It had to look right before I could think clearly. That's what I told myself. But really, I was avoiding the terrifying moment where ideas meet reality, where I risked discovering that what I had to say wasn't worth all the polish. That's the cruel irony of perfectionism. It often leaves things unfinished. The very people trying the hardest to do things right are the ones who leave the most undone. Because starting is vulnerable. Finishing is final. But tweaking? Oh, tweaking is safe. It lets you stay in motion without ever crossing the finish line. There's a fish, yes, another fish, called the mudskipper. It lives both in water and on land, flopping between worlds. That's perfectionism in action, never fully diving in, never quite resting either. Always hopping between intention and paralysis. Always preparing, rarely committing. This is the point where Freud re-enters the picture. He'd probably say that perfectionism is the superego gone rogue. The superego, remember, is the internalized voice of authority. It holds our values, our rules, our shoulds, and when it's balanced, it keeps us grounded. But when it's inflated, it becomes a tyrant. Mine sounds like a disappointed teacher. Calm, sharp, British for some reason. She says things like, "Is that really your best effort?" Or worse, "This was always going to be too hard for you." And that voice keeps me frozen, not from lack of ability, but from an overabundance of judgment. There's still an open academic debate about whether perfectionism is a personality trait, a learned behavior, or a defensive posture. But for me, it's clearly all three. It's part of my wiring, sure, but it's also a survival strategy, one picked up along the way. And like most survival strategies, it eventually turned on me. Because striving for perfection doesn't just delay action, it drains joy. It turns creativity into a tightrope walk. One wrong move, and the whole thing collapses. You can't play. You can't experiment. You can't say, "This might be messy and still be good." You're stuck polishing the doorknob while the house burns down. I find this particular perspective on human intelligence reassuring. The brain thrives on error. That's how learning happens. Neuroplasticity isn't about repeating success. It's about recovering from failure. But perfectionism blocks that process. It tells you, failure is unacceptable, which is like telling your immune system to avoid germs entirely. It's just not how we grow. I once tried to write the perfect opening sentence to an article. I spent 4 hours on it. Didn't write a second sentence. That's how ridiculous it gets. And still, my brain tried to congratulate me. At least you care about quality. No, that wasn't quality. That was fear disguised as standards. Even now, I sometimes catch myself rewriting the same paragraph 5 times, not because it's wrong, but because it doesn't feel right. That vague dissatisfaction is usually a cue, not that the work is bad, but that my anxiety is running the show. I try to remember now that most perfect things are only perfect in hindsight. Great art, great writing, great ideas, they all start ugly. Confused. Half-baked. The magic doesn't happen because someone chased perfection. It happens because someone kept going. Sometimes, I force myself to write a bad draft on purpose. I call it my garbage round. Full typos. Run-on sentences. Nonsense ideas. But once it's down, I can breathe. Because now I'm working with clay, not thin air. And clay can be shaped, perfected even later. You'd be amazed how much energy is freed up when you stop trying to impress ghosts. And that's the thing, right? Perfectionism often isn't about the actual audience. It's about an imagined one. Freud would have said that we're always performing, even when we're alone. For the internal audience of our superego, that voice doesn't sleep. It just watches, judges, grades in red pen. But we can train it. Not silence it entirely, but soften it. I started doing this trick. When I feel frozen by perfectionism, I ask, would I say this to a friend? If not, then it doesn't deserve airtime in my mind. Another trick? I lower the bar. Radically. Instead of writing a brilliant essay, I aim to write 5 bad sentences. Instead of cooking the perfect meal, I aim to burn something safely. It's not reverse psychology, it's freedom. Because once the pressure lifts, the work flows. Freud would have argued that all this striving hides a deeper wish to be unconditionally accepted, to be loved before you're perfect. That hits, doesn't it? Because that's what we're really afraid of, that if we're flawed, we won't be worthy. So we delay, polish, revise, delay again, until we're sure we'll be lovable. But that moment never arrives, because we were lovable the whole time. So next time you find yourself tweaking that project for the 6th hour, ask, what am I afraid will happen if this isn't perfect? Then be brave enough to answer. The truth might surprise you, and maybe, just maybe, it'll set you free. Deadlines never scare me growing up. Authority did. There's a difference, but they're often dressed in the same beige polo and carry the same clipboard. You know what I mean? The moment a task becomes something someone else expects, it takes on a strange weight. It's no longer about the thing. It's about who told you to do it. Freud would have something to say about that, of course. He believed our early relationships with authority figures, parents, teachers, priests, the older cousin who always seemed weirdly in charge of family games, leave behind internal imprints. We internalize their voices, their judgments, their rules. They become part of our superego. And sometimes, when we procrastinate, we're not resisting the task. We're resisting them. I realized this while avoiding a report for work. The task wasn't hard, just boring. But every time I sat down to do it, I felt this weird resistance, like a rubber band snapping me back. Eventually, I caught the voice in my head. You'd better do it exactly the way they wanted. Not how I wanted. Not even what made sense. Just whatever they meant. An old teacher, maybe a parent. A boss who once humiliated me in a meeting and lives rent-free in my nervous system. Procrastination, in those moments, isn't about laziness. It's a quiet rebellion. Freud called this reaction against authority. We delay, drag our feet, conveniently forget. Not because we're incapable, but because deep down, doing the task feels like submitting to someone who once made us feel powerless. The term resistance, in Freudian theory, originally described a patient's unconscious refusal to talk about something in therapy, but happens outside therapy too. Resistance isn't refusal, it's a defense. When I delay responding to a supervisor's email for 2 days, I'm not saying no. I'm saying, you don't own me. It's petty, it's subconscious, but it's real. There's also this strange thing that happens when you've been a good kid your whole life. You followed the rules. You made the grade. And now, as an adult, you're still following invisible orders, but nobody's watching. So what do? You rebel. Quietly. Self-sabotage disguised as taking your time. Once I was offered a leadership opportunity, something that would have advanced my career. I said I'd think about it. Then I ghosted the conversation for 3 weeks. Why? Because taking it meant becoming them, the authority. And some deep part of me still associates authority with control, coldness, criticism. I didn't want to become what once scared me. Freud would argue this is unresolved identification. We don't just fear authority, we absorb it. And when that authority was flawed or cruel, we reject it so hard. We reject anything that reminds us of it, even things that would benefit us. You know that elephants trained in captivity are often chained as babies. When they're grown, they don't even need the chains. They'll stay in place out of habit. Psychological captivity. It's not the chain. It's the memory of the chain. That's how early authority works. It shapes the limits of what we believe we can do, even when no one's holding us back. Now, there's academic debate over how much our early experiences actually dictate adult behavior. Some psychologists say the brain is more plastic, more adaptable than Freud gave it credit for. Others say those early grooves run deep, especially when carved by fear or shame. I think the truth lives somewhere in between, because while I've grown, I still find myself ducking assignments that carry the weight of someone else's expectations. I've seen this pattern in others too. Friends who delay answering texts from their mother for days. Not because they're busy, but because every reply feels like stepping into a childhood script. Colleagues who forget deadlines they don't agree with, as a kind of passive protest. It's all the same root, the shadow of old authority pressing down on the present. Sometimes I wonder, what would this task feel like if it wasn't attached to someone else's approval? What if I was just doing it for me? That shift can be liberating. It reframes the work from obedience to ownership, from control to choice. There's also a counterpattern worth noting. Some of us overperform for authority. We procrastinate less when someone's watching. We become model workers, rule followers, gold star adults. But it's not about the task. It's about chasing approval. That's the other side of the same coin. Whether you're rebelling or over-complying, you're still not acting freely. I used to think I was independent. But when I started tracking when I procrastinated, I noticed a pattern. The more external the expectation, the more likely I was to freeze. And the more internal the desire, the more it mattered to me, the more I showed up, even when it was hard. It's like my inner child still wants to prove they don't have to do what they're told, even when the is me. This is where Freud's concept of transference comes in. It's the idea that we project feelings from past relationships onto present ones. So your boss becomes your father. Your editor becomes your critical mom. Your mentor becomes your older sibling. And suddenly, you're not dealing with them. You're dealing with your history. I started naming these moments out loud. Okay, this isn't my boss. This is my third-grade teacher who told me my handwriting was too messy to be taken seriously. Just saying it brings the fear into the light. And once it's visible, it shrinks. A little. Eventually, I realized that procrastination isn't just an act. It's a message. It says, this task feels loaded. And instead of shaming myself, I try to unpack what's been stuffed inside. Old voices, old wounds, sometimes even old victories that feel hard to live up to. So if you're putting something off right now, something small, something serious, pause. Ask yourself, who does this task represent? You might be surprised by the answer. And the moment you see it, you take back a little power. Because you're not that kid anymore. You can set your own tone. Define your own success. Make friends with deadlines instead of fearing them. You don't need to win anyone's love with perfect work. You're already enough, even in progress. It was around 11:47 p.m. when I realized I was being bullied by myself. I'd spent most of the day procrastinating on a project, again, and now the internal voice had shown up. The one that never misses a deadline, because it doesn't do the work, it just heckles you about not doing it. You're useless. Of course you didn't finish. Typical. You always ruin everything. There it was, the inner critic. Freud called it the superego, and boy, mine is persistent. Relentless, actually. It doesn't whisper, it lectures. Like a judgmental aunt who shows up uninvited, critiques your curtains, your career, your life choices, and then leaves without helping with the dishes. The superego isn't just your conscience. It's the internalization of every voice that ever criticized you, disappointed you, or made love feel conditional. In theory, it helps you develop a moral compass. In practice, it often just makes you feel like garbage for missing a Monday morning Zoom call. The more you procrastinate, the louder it gets. It feeds on guilt. You delay, then feel bad. Then the voice kicks in, tells you you're a failure, which makes you feel worse. So you procrastinate more. It's a beautiful, toxic loop, like getting stuck on a merry-go-round powered by self-loathing. I started noticing that my superego often sounded like people I hadn't spoken to in years. A childhood coach, a teacher who once said, "You're smart, but you're lazy," which, by the way, is the intellectual's version of a backhanded slap. It's like these ghosts found permanent residence in my head, and they brought folding chairs. There's open academic debate about how much influence the superego actually has in modern psychological models. Some say it's outdated, that our understanding of personality and motivation has evolved beyond Freud's tripartite structure. But you know what hasn't changed? That voice in your head telling you you're not enough. So whether you call it the superego, the inner critic, or Karen from accounting, it's still there, and it still bites. This is a fact that's not widely known. Chimpanzees show signs of self-regulation and social shame. They've been observed turning their backs or covering their faces after doing something wrong in a group, which means even primates have a proto-superego. Imagine that. A chimp sitting in the jungle, beating itself up over stealing too many bananas. That made me feel better, honestly. Like I wasn't alone in the zoo of internal judgment. But here's what Freud got right. The superego doesn't actually help you act better. It helps you feel worse about not acting at all. When I miss a deadline, it's not the shame that gets me back on track. It's compassion. It's the moment I stop beating myself up long enough to say, all right, what's the next small thing I can do? The inner critic hates that. It wants drama, grand acts of repentance. You've wasted hours, so now you must pull an all-nighter to atone. Meanwhile, my tired brain just wants a snack and a nap. There's this myth that being hard on yourself will make you productive. And I used to believe it. I thought if I wasn't tough, I'd fall apart. But the truth? Shame is heavy. It slows you down. Like trying to run a marathon with a backpack full of rocks labeled not good enough. One night, I decided to write down all the things my inner critic said to me during a bad procrastination spell. I filled an entire page in 5 minutes. Things I would never say to another human being. Ever. Then I asked, whose voice is this really? And slowly, the faces came back. People who meant well, maybe, but people who made me feel like my worth was tied to my output. And that's the heart of it. Procrastination often awakens the critic, but it's the critic that sustains the procrastination. Because the worse you feel, the harder it is to act. And the harder it is to act, the more you beat yourself up. And around we go. I've started giving my inner critic a name. Nancy. No offense to any Nancys out there. It just felt right. When Nancy starts in, I go, thanks for the input, Nancy. But we're doing it differently now. Do I sound unhinged? Maybe, but it works. Giving the voice a name separates it from me. Because the truth is, that voice isn't you. It's a survival mechanism, a leftover script, something you picked up when you were small and impressionable and just wanted to be good enough to stay loved. That's what Freud saw in the superego, not a moral guide, but a guard dog that sometimes bites its owner. And it gets worse when you care about the thing you're avoiding. Because the stakes feel high, the judgment feels sharper. Nancy doesn't scream about dishes. She screams about dreams. You'll never finish that book. No one wants to read what you have to say. That's what she really digs in. But you know what Nancy can't handle? Progress. Even the tiniest bit. A single sentence. A single email sent. One paragraph scribbled in a notebook. Action doesn't silence the critic. It confuses her. She panics. Her power comes from your paralysis. So when you move, even just a little, she stumbles. There's also this. I try to thank her sometimes. Weird, I know. But I'll say, hey, Nancy, I know you're trying to keep me safe. I know you think if I don't try, I can't fail. But I'm okay now. I don't need protection. I need momentum. It's oddly soothing. Like telling a scared child that the monster under the bed is gone. And slowly, the voice loses its grip. So if your inner critic is screaming at you right now, here's a thought. Don't fight it. Don't obey it either. Just hear it. Say, there you are. The voice that tells me I'm nothing until I do everything. Then go do one small thing. Not to shut the voice up, but to prove you can act without its permission. Because at the end of the day, the inner critic is a part of you, but it's not the boss. You are. Even if that means writing one line, closing the laptop, and whispering, "Good enough for now." Let me tell you about the day my calendar became a haunted house. It started innocently enough, just another Monday morning. I opened my laptop, clicked into Google Calendar, and there it was, a week full of color-coded promises I had no intention of keeping. Bright blocks of productivity, fake meetings with myself, deadlines that felt like jokes. I stared at them like they were taunting me. And suddenly, my carefully planned week felt more like a psychological trap than a helpful tool. I used to believe that time management would save me. If I just found the right system, bullet journaling, Pomodoro, Gantt charts, I'd finally get things done. But Freud would have seen right through the glitter pens and calendar widgets. Because what I was dealing with wasn't bad planning. It was bad wiring. The kind you can't see on paper. The kind that lives under the surface. The ego is the planner. The superego is the enforcer. But when the ID takes over, the whole system crashes. And suddenly, even the most structured to-do list becomes a museum of broken promises. Each unchecked box, a tiny monument to the conflict between what I want to do and what I feel safe doing. I once scheduled a whole day into 30-minute increments. This, I said dramatically, will change everything. Spoiler. I spent most of the day modifying the schedule instead of following it. I rescheduled breaks. I color-coded relaxation. I made a flowchart explaining how to start tasks. By evening, I had achieved nothing except a very impressive visual representation of avoidance. It hit me then, structure is neutral. If what's underneath it is chaos, the calendar just reflects that back at you. I wasn't bad at managing time. I was bad at managing emotion. And the calendar couldn't help me with that. It didn't know about fear, or shame, or the strange psychological phenomenon of crying in the parking lot of a Trader Joe's after canceling a phone call. There's a growing debate in psychology about whether time management tools can actually change behavior, or whether they just organize your guilt. It's the difference between planning your future and trying to micromanage your anxiety. I was clearly doing the latter. Freud didn't live in the age of Eichel or Outlook, but I imagine he'd laugh at our modern obsessions with productivity tools. Because no app, no matter how aesthetic, can overrule an unconscious conflict. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a ghost. One time, I even downloaded a task app that congratulated me with fireworks every time I completed something. I became addicted to completing very small tasks. Email Becky. Fireworks. Refill water bottle. Fireworks. Seat at desk. Fireworks. Meanwhile, the big, important task sat untouched in the corner, growing mold. The point is, we use time management systems to feel in control, especially when we're not. And sometimes, the illusion of control is enough to make us feel better. But more often, it becomes another layer of resistance. Because we start thinking, I can't do the thing yet. I haven't set up the right system. And just like that, we're back in the maze. Even worse, we punish ourselves with the tools we thought would help. You blocked out time and still didn't do it, the voice says. Maybe you're just incapable. That voice is the superego again, turning a spreadsheet into a character judgment. And don't even get me started on alarms. Nothing like being gently reminded you failed again at exactly 3:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. People are more likely to underestimate how long a task will take if it's important to their identity. It's called the planning fallacy, and it explains why I keep thinking I can write 2,000 words in an hour, even though I've never once done that. Hope, it turns out, is not a strategy. There was one moment where I looked at a full week of scheduled deep work sessions, blocked perfectly in purple, and realized I had done none of them. Not one. The calendar was a fantasy novel. Fiction. A schedule of a version of me that exists only in theory. So what did I do? I deleted everything. All the blocks. All the structure. And I sat with the empty grid, trying not to panic. Because for the first time in a while, there was no illusion. Just space. Just me. And the question, what do I actually want to do right now? And that's when things started to shift. Because here's the thing. Time management isn't about time. It's about trust. Do you trust yourself to follow through? Do you believe you're allowed to want what you want? Can you act without needing to be micromanaged by your own neurosis? Freud would say the calendar is just the latest symbol in a long chain of attempts to impose order on the unruly self. But the real work, the work behind the work, is about integration, about bringing the unconscious into the light so it stops running the show from behind the curtain. I still use a calendar. I still block time. But now I leave space, wiggle room, grace. I treat it like a suggestion, not a sentence. I don't fill every hour. I don't color code my soul. And when I inevitably wander off schedule, I don't spiral. I breathe. I check in. I ask, okay, what's really going on here? Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's fatigue. Sometimes I just need to feel for a bit before I act. That's not weakness. That's being human. So if your calendar is yelling at you right now, know this. You're not broken. You're not lazy. You're not a bad adult. You're just someone with a complicated mind trying to survive in a world that runs on deadlines and dopamine. And maybe, just maybe, the most productive thing you can do is forgive yourself for needing more than a planner can give. It started with a blank screen and a blinking cursor, like it always does. The idea was there. The excitement was there. Even the time was carved out. But the moment I tried to start, a strange heaviness settled in. Not fear exactly. Not laziness either. More like a soft refusal. A quiet, not yet humming in my bones. And that's when it hit me. Maybe I wasn't avoiding what I didn't want. Maybe I was avoiding what I secretly wanted most. Freud believed that desires don't just vanish when we ignore them. They morph. They go underground. And when they surface again, they often wear costumes. Delay, self-sabotage, distraction. So we think we're just putting off a project or a conversation or a decision. But maybe, just maybe, we're putting off ourselves. There's this unsettling truth no productivity guru will tell you. People procrastinate not only because they fear failure, but because they fear fulfillment. Because if you finally do the thing, if you finally take the risk, then the fantasy dies. And reality walks in with muddy shoes. I remember once sitting on a nearly finished piece of writing for weeks. It was good, maybe even great. And I told everyone, I'm just tweaking it. But really, I was terrified of sending it out. Because once I did, it could be ignored, or misunderstood, or praised. All of those outcomes felt equally unsafe. Because the piece wasn't just words, it was a piece of me. That's what Freud meant when he said our actions are overdetermined. Nothing is ever just a missed email or just a delayed project. There are layers, hidden motives, and at the bottom of those layers, desire, complicated, volatile, sacred. Desire that we dress up as laziness because we don't know how to want without also fearing. There's this bird called the bowerbird. The male builds elaborate structures, bowers decorated with shells, berries, even bits of plastic, all to impress a mate. It's a display of intention, vulnerability, creative yearning. But sometimes the male bowerbird will abandon the bower halfway through, even if it's nearly complete. And scientists still don't entirely know why. I wonder if they get scared too. If some part of their instinct whispers, if you finish this, someone might actually show up. And then what? We like to say that procrastination protects us from discomfort. But what if it's protecting us from hope? From a moment we admit, even to ourselves, that we really care about something. Because once we care, we're exposed. Vulnerable. It's safer in a backwards way to pretend we're unmotivated than to admit we're afraid of how much we want something. I've seen people delay finishing portfolios, submitting applications, booking auditions, not because they didn't want success, but because success would mean change. And change is terrifying. The identity you've carefully built, the underachiever, the procrastinator, the one who doesn't really care, would have to die. And your unconscious might fight to preserve that old identity at all costs. There's open academic debate about the role of self-sabotage in procrastination. Is it always unconscious? Is it a learned behavior? Freud wouldn't have hesitated. Self-sabotage, he'd argue, is the unconscious protecting the self from unbearable emotional exposure. There was this one time I almost booked a gig I'd been dreaming about for years. I had the draft email ready. I had the connection. All I had to do was send it. I didn't. I waited 3 days, watched the window close, and told myself, you probably wouldn't have gotten it anyway. But deep down, I knew I didn't avoid the rejection. I avoided the possibility of being chosen, because that felt even scarier. Sometimes I think procrastination is less like drowning and more like floating, adrift, untethered, almost peaceful, until you realize how far you've drifted from where you meant to go. It's the slow avoidance of momentum, because once you move, things start happening, and then you're no longer safe in fantasy. You're in reality, and reality has teeth. You ever notice how easy it is to help other people with their dreams? Their resumes, their ideas, their businesses. You show up for them. You cheer. You fix the typos. But when it's time to show up for you, you ghost yourself. Why? Because their dreams are not a mirror. Yours are, and mirrors show everything. Hope, doubt, desire, aging skin, all of it. And when the thing you want most is on the line, even minor actions feel loaded. Sending an email becomes a referendum on your worth. Starting a novel becomes a battle with your entire self-image. It's not just about the task. It's about what the task represents. Freud might call this wish avoidance, the idea that we avoid what we most want when it threatens our constructed identity. If you spend your whole life being the one who never finishes, then completing something amazing means killing that version of you. And part of you might mourn it. The brain often reacts to success the same way it reacts to threat. Increased heart rate, sweaty palms, tunnel vision, because success implies change, and change activates the nervous system. So the moment you get closer to what you want, your body may panic like you're about to get eaten by a bear, which is ridiculous, obviously, but also very real. So what do? We stall. We say, I'll start when I'm more ready, more rested, more certain. But those are moving targets. The truth is, you'll never be entirely ready. You'll just be tired of waiting. I've started reframing my own procrastination as sacred. Not good, not bad, just holy. A sign that something inside me is awakening. That I'm standing near the edge of something real. And realness takes time. But I also try not to wait too long at the edge. Because sometimes the only way to honor desire is to act. Not perfectly. Not fearlessly, just honestly. One tiny step that says, I see you, dream. I'm not running from you today. And sometimes, that's enough to break the spell. It always starts innocently enough. I'll just rest my eyes for a second. Or, I deserve a break before I start. Next thing I know, I'm horizontal, swaddled in 3 blankets, scrolling through reviews of blenders I'll never buy, eating snacks I don't remember preparing. If you ask me, I'd say I was taking a quick mental break. Freud, however, would probably narrow his eyes and say, interesting. Defensive behavior masking unconscious negotiation. Because that's what it feels like sometimes. Like there's a secret meeting happening deep inside me. A huddle of emotional diplomats deciding whether I'm allowed to begin. And the snacks, the naps, the quick scrolls, they're not random. They're bribes, concessions. Rituals in an invisible negotiation with my unconscious mind. Freud believed that the unconscious was not just a place of repression, but also of strategy. He'd say procrastination is a form of indirect resistance, an attempt to satisfy both the pleasure principle, immediate comfort, and the reality principle, the need to eventually act. So when I tell myself, just one episode, then I'll work, that's not failure. That's compromise. My psyche trying to serve 2 masters at once. But here's the thing, it's a rigged deal. Because that episode becomes 2, then 5, then suddenly it's dark outside, and I'm rewatching a show I've already seen, not because it's good, but because it's safe. And safety, when we're on the verge of doing something vulnerable, becomes the drug of choice. You ever notice how your body always seems to need a nap when you're about to write something honest? Or how hunger hits exactly when it's time to make a difficult phone call? That's not coincidence. That's defense. Freud might call it somatic substitution, when psychological conflict manifests physically. Your body becomes the fall guy for your mind's resistance. I used to hate myself for those pre-task rituals. The tidying, the tea-making, the sudden interest in reorganizing my spice rack alphabetically. But then I started looking at them differently. not as sabotage, but as strategy. My unconscious was stalling, yes, but not out of cruelty, out of caution. Because the truth is, many tasks we procrastinate aren't just tasks. They're thresholds. Sending the email might lead to rejection. Starting the business might lead to failure. Writing the poem might lead to someone seeing you. And even if the outcome is good, the exposure still costs something. So the unconscious buys time, buys peace, buys stillness before the storm. But it does so clumsily, because while it's trying to help, it's also creating suffering. You delay. You feel guilty. You spiral. You snack more. You sleep poorly. Then you wake up ashamed. And guess what? Shame is exhausting. So you need another nap. Rinse, repeat. There's ongoing academic debate about whether procrastination is a result of poor self-regulation or a deeper fear of failure. Freud would likely respond, why not both? The unconscious doesn't care about neat categories. It only cares about keeping you safe, even if that safety ruins your timeline. I once delayed writing a proposal by cleaning my entire apartment. We're talking vacuumed baseboards, alphabetized books, refolded towels. It was productive, technically, but when I finally sat down to write, I had nothing left in the tank. My energy had been spent negotiating with my fear, in the form of Windex and lemon-scented resolve. This is what I've started to notice. Every delay has a hidden script. If I just eat first, I'll think better. If I nap, I'll wake up with clarity. If I give myself one more day, the words will come. And sometimes those things are true, but more often, they're the unconscious trying to wiggle out of risk. I don't fight it anymore. I work with it. Here's what that looks like. I let myself do the ritual, but with a cap. 10 minutes to make tea. One episode before the timer starts. I tell myself, you can bribe the ID, but you still have to show up for the ego. It's like dealing with a moody toddler. You don't yell. You make a gentle deal. There's also this. I've started naming what I'm actually afraid of before I start. I'll sit down and say out loud, I'm scared this will suck. I'm scared I'll get ignored. I'm scared I'll care too much. And somehow, that honesty clears the air. The unconscious gets heard, and that makes it more likely to cooperate. You know what else helps? Tiny victories. Not completing the thing, just starting it. Writing one awkward sentence. Opening the doc. Typing the subject line of the email. It's like letting the unconscious test the water. See? No one died. It's fine. Human intelligence isn't just about solving problems. It's about adapting to emotional terrain. And procrastination, at its core, is an emotional landscape. Not a time problem, not a willpower issue, but a terrain full of booby traps, false exits, and sleepy distractions that feel like kindness but act like poison. Sometimes I'll schedule a resistance break. I literally block time to resist. All right, 3 to 3:30 p.m., panic scroll, snack. And then at 3:30, I start. Not because I feel ready, but because I've already made space for my inner chaos. It got its seat at the table. Now I can shut up. So if you're lying on the couch right now, telling yourself, I'll get up soon, know this. Your unconscious is negotiating. Not against you, but for you. It's trying to buy peace before exposure. And while that may not help your deadline, it means your mind is working exactly as it should. You're not lazy. You're in dialogue. And the sooner you stop judging the delay and start listening to the fear underneath it, the sooner the negotiation can end and the work can begin. I was supposed to be working, but instead I was staring at the wall, imagining my future self with flawless skin, impeccable taste, and a New York Times best-selling memoir. In this daydream, I had already made it. No more resistance, no more inner critic, no more overdue invoices. Just vibes, bookshelves, and people quoting me on Twitter. That's when I caught myself. Not just procrastinating, but dreaming. Freud would have perked up at that, because to him, dreams weren't just nighttime nonsense. They were messages, desires in disguise. And in my case, procrastination wasn't just an act of delay. It was a stage, a place where fantasies played out safely, with none of the risk that action requires. We tend to think of procrastination as doing nothing, but that's not true. Our minds are busy, creating alternate timelines, imagining scenarios, bargaining, fantasizing, Freud called this wish fulfillment. When a desire can't be satisfied in real life, it finds expression in fantasy. And procrastination is fertile soil for fantasy. I once spent an entire afternoon mapping out a fake TED Talk in my head. I had the outfit, the opening joke, the emotional arc. I even imagined the standing ovation. Meanwhile, the actual writing that could one day lead to that moment, unopened, neglected, cold. It felt productive, inspiring even, but it was also protection. Because in the dream, I can be brilliant without being judged. I can be loved without being vulnerable. I can skip the messy middle and go straight to applause. That's the allure of fantasy. It gives us the reward without the risk. And when you're scared of failure, of exposure, of disappointing yourself or others, it's a beautiful, dangerous escape hatch. There's a psychological term for this: maladaptive daydreaming. It's when imagined scenarios start to interfere with real-life goals. And I get it, because in the world of my fantasies, I never procrastinate. I'm on top of my game. I have boundless energy. I never write a single awkward sentence. But that world isn't real. But dreams, while seductive, can become prisons, especially if you start living in them. Because the more vivid the fantasy, the more it can paralyze you. You start measuring your current self against the ideal version in your head. And let me tell you, real you will always lose to fantasy you. And that gap, that distance between the fantasy and the real, that's where procrastination digs in. You delay because you can't bear the thought of how far there is to go. So you live in the future. You plan. You visualize. You even Pinterest. But you don't act. Freud would say that fantasy is the unconscious offering a compromise. It's saying, you can't have this yet, but you can imagine it. And that's not evil. It's actually quite kind. The unconscious is trying to soothe you, to give you something when the real thing feels too far or too scary. But fantasy, like sugar, loses its sweetness when it becomes the main course. I've started paying closer attention to my daydreams. Not to shut them down, but to decode them. What do I keep imagining? Applause? Escape? Connection? If I can understand what I'm craving in fantasy, I can start feeding that desire in reality. One friend of mine procrastinates by fantasizing about quitting everything and moving to the woods. When we talked about it, it turned out she didn't actually want to leave society. She just wanted silence, stillness, room to breathe. So now she schedules 1 hour a week of total quiet. No phones, no noise, just stillness. And guess what? She procrastinates less. Because sometimes the fantasy isn't telling you what to avoid, it's telling you what you need. There's open academic debate about how much of procrastination is linked to escapism, but Freud wouldn't have doubted it. He saw fantasy not as weakness, but as evidence of desire. And in Freud's world, desire was everything. I used to think my procrastination fantasies were shameful, that they meant I was broken, lazy, delusional. But now I see them as data, as a little postcard from the unconscious saying, hey, this matters to you. The TED Talk, the book tour, the accolades, they're not just ego trips. They're clues. The trick is not to shame the fantasy, and also not to live in it. The trick is to use it as fuel, to let it remind you what's possible, and then get to work on the very unglamorous, very real first step. Sometimes that means opening the Google document. Sometimes it means writing a terrible draft. Sometimes it means replying to the email that scares you. Because while fantasy is beautiful, action is what builds the bridge from dream to reality. And yes, it will feel clumsy, awkward, underwhelming. That's okay, because the real you, the one typing slowly, deleting half of it, doubting everything, is so much braver than the fantasy version who never stumbles. That's something no one claps for, but it matters more than a standing ovation. So the next time you find yourself drifting off into some perfect future, don't panic. Don't snap out of it. Just listen. Ask, what am I really longing for? And then take one step, small, flawed, present, toward that longing. The fantasy can wait. It'll still be there. But maybe it won't be fantasy forever. There's a moment, always around 9:15 p.m., when I find myself in a strange kind of trance. I'm sitting at my desk, 3 windows open, switching between tabs like a gambler pulling slots. Spotify is looping ambient beats, a half-empty mug of something cold is within reach, and I'm bouncing between writing a paragraph and researching what raccoons eat. This is the loop, the weird middle space between procrastination and productivity, where you're technically doing things but not the thing you meant to do. And if you've been here, it feels like movement, but you're not going anywhere. We love to think of procrastination and productivity as opposites, but in reality, they often coexist, not as enemies, but as dance partners, spinning you around until you forget who's leading. Freud, if he were here, might say this loop is a psychic compromise, a way to indulge the unconscious while still looking busy. Ego soothed, ID entertained, superego temporarily sedated. I call it the loop because it never really ends. You do something, then pivot to something else, then go back to the first thing, then check your email real quick, and somehow it's midnight. You didn't waste the day exactly, but you didn't move forward either. You hovered. The weirdest part is, sometimes the loop looks productive. You clean the inbox. You replied to that group chat. You tweaked your resume header font. There's a buzz to it, a false sense of mastery. But deep down, you know, you were circling the real work, afraid to land. I once spent an entire Saturday working on my portfolio. Translation: I picked a new template, then re-picked it, then Googled better portfolio fonts, then went down a rabbit hole about the history of Helvetica. By dinner, I had nothing tangible, but I felt like I'd worked. I'd burned calories, just not emotional calories. There's a concept in psychology called structured procrastination, where you do easier or lower stakes tasks to avoid harder, more meaningful ones. It's the art of being busy instead of brave. And it works until it doesn't. Freud might argue that the loop is the ego's desperate attempt to appease both inner masters, the ID, craving comfort and stimulation, and the superego, demanding discipline and perfection. So the ego compromises. We won't do the scary thing, but we'll do 10 smaller things and hope that counts. And you know what? Sometimes it does count. Sometimes clearing your inbox helps. Sometimes fixing the printer or cleaning your workspace clears mental fog. But when it becomes a lifestyle, when every day becomes a mosaic of half-finished things, it starts to chip away at your sense of integrity. It's like building a sandcastle just below the high tide line. You see the shape, but it keeps washing away. There's open academic debate about the functional role of procrastination loops. Some researchers see it as a breakdown of executive function. Others argue it's a form of internal conflict resolution. Procrastination not as failure, but as emotional buffering. Freud would say it's both. It's the unconscious trying to delay an ego collapse by distracting you with low-risk wins. I've had days where I crush my checklist, laundry done, groceries bought, messages answered, and still felt deeply unsatisfied. That's how I know the loop got me. Because the real work, the hard, meaningful, uncomfortable thing, remained untouched. And no number of perfectly sliced bell peppers will fix that. Sometimes I wish I could install a focus-only mode in my own brain. But even then, I'd probably end up making an elaborate Notion page about focusing instead of just doing the thing. So what breaks the loop? For me, it's honesty. Brutal, gentle honesty. I have to pause and ask, what am I really avoiding right now? Is it boredom? Shame? Fear of sucking? Fear of being seen? Because once I name the fear, the spell starts to lift. The loop thrives on vagueness, on soft denial, but clarity cuts through. Another thing that helps? A single, tangible win. Not 10 little tasks. Just one bold act. Write the intro. Send the pitch. Film the first awkward take. Anything that touches the core project. Because that tiny breakthrough acts like an anchor. It drags you out of orbit. I've also stopped aiming for flow all the time. Flow is great, but it's not always available. Some days, the work feels like pulling teeth underwater. That's normal. That's human. And expecting flow can become another trap. Another loop. I'll start when I feel inspired. Good luck with that. Instead, I aim for presence. Just being here, fully, with the awkward sentence or the clunky outline. Being in it, not escaping. Even if it's slow, human intelligence, at its best, is about tolerating contradiction. We are capable of brilliance and nonsense in the same hour. We can want something deeply and still avoid it completely. That's not a flaw. That's the deal. So if you're stuck in a loop right now, tab switching, snack grabbing, pretending to plan, know this: you're not failing. You're negotiating. You're trying to move forward without getting hurt. It's clumsy, but it's kind of beautiful too, because underneath all the busy work, the lists, the bouncing, is a heart that cares, that wants to do something meaningful, that's afraid to mess it up. You're not lazy. You're just looping, and you can break it gently, bravely, imperfectly, one real action at a time. It was a rainy Tuesday, the kind that makes every excuse feel more legitimate, and I found myself scrolling through a therapist directory instead of doing my work. Not because I was in crisis, exactly, but because I was stuck, paralyzed, drowning in half-started things and self-loathing. I didn't want a productivity coach or another planner app. I wanted someone to talk to, someone to help me untangle the invisible web inside my mind. That's when it hit me. Freud's whole shtick, talk therapy, might actually be the only thing that could reach the root of this thing we call procrastination. Not a hack, not a habit tracker, just talking. Freud didn't invent therapy, but he gave it structure. He called it the talking cure. And at its core, it wasn't about solutions. It was about saying things out loud that have been rotting in silence. Because once you say the thing, it stops controlling you from shadows. And that's what procrastination feels like: shadow control. You're not just delaying a task. You're avoiding a conversation, a feeling, a belief about yourself that's too painful to look at directly. The first time I brought up procrastination in therapy, I expected tips, tools, strategies. Instead, my therapist asked, "What are you afraid will happen if you succeed?" That question hit me like a slap wrapped in a cashmere glove. I hadn't thought about that. We're taught to fear failure. But success? That's just as terrifying, because success means visibility, expectations, maintenance. If you're someone who's used to hiding, success can feel like stepping into a spotlight without any pants on. There's still an open academic debate about how effective talk therapy is compared to other forms of treatment, especially for things like ADHD, depression, or anxiety, which often ride shotgun with chronic procrastination. But Freud would argue that procrastination isn't just a behavior, it's a symptom. And if you only treat the behavior, you miss the root. One time in therapy, I traced a task I'd been avoiding, writing a pitch, back to a teacher who once told me I was too much, too intense, too dramatic. That voice was still in my head every time I sat down to pitch myself. I wasn't avoiding the task. I was avoiding the feeling of being too much again. Once I said it out loud, it lost its grip. Not completely, but enough to let me type, enough to let me try. And that's the thing with talk therapy. It doesn't erase fear, but it shines a light on it. And fear, like mold, loses power in the sun. Freud's model of therapy focused on free association, saying whatever came to mind, no matter how silly or shameful. And when I tried it, I was shocked at what surfaced. Random things, forgotten things. The time I got laughed at for mispronouncing a word in class. The look on my mom's face when I brought home a bad grade. None of it was about the task on my desk, but all of it was related, because that's how our minds work. The past isn't buried. It's stored. And every time we avoid something important, we might be brushing up against those old files, whether we know it or not. Talk therapy helps you unpack those files with someone who won't flinch, who won't tell you to just focus or stop overthinking, because they know it's not about the thing. It's about what the thing means. I've started treating my to-do list like a therapist's couch. Every item that makes me recoil gets a second look. Not, why can't I do this, but what does this represent? 9 times out of 10, the answer isn't about logistics. It's about identity, worth, fear. And sometimes just saying that out loud to someone, anyone, frees up the energy to act. Of course, therapy isn't a miracle. It's slow, boring even. Sometimes you leave a session feeling like nothing happened. But then 3 days later, you find yourself writing or calling or cleaning without that inner friction. That's the magic of insight. It doesn't force movement. It permits it. Freud said that insight leads to change, but only when it's integrated emotionally, not just intellectually. So you can know you're avoiding a task because of childhood trauma, but until you feel the shift, nothing really changes. And yeah, that sucks, because it means progress isn't linear. It's not a checklist. It's a messy spiral of remembering, realizing, relapsing, and returning. But it's worth it, because the more I talk, the less power the shadows have. And the less power they have, the more often I can act from clarity, not from compulsion. Human intelligence isn't just about solving problems. It's about making sense of ourselves in real time. Therapy helps with that. It's not about fixing the procrastination. It's about making peace with what it's trying to protect. So if you've ever thought about therapy and talked yourself out of it because you're not that messed up or other people have it worse, consider this. Maybe therapy isn't for fixing broken people. Maybe it's for brave people who are tired of playing the same old game with their fears. Maybe talking about your procrastination is the first act of resistance against it. The first moment you stop whispering and start telling the truth. And maybe, just maybe, that's how things begin to move again. I used to think healing looked like a straight line. You start in pain, you do the work, and eventually you emerge on the other side, glowing, productive, emotionally balanced, with perfect skin and maybe a book deal. But healing, it turns out, doesn't care about your Pinterest board. It's messy, circular, full of fake outs and false starts. And it doesn't always feel like healing. Sometimes it feels like forgetting your own progress until it shows up in the smallest way, like sending that email without spiraling. Procrastination, too, isn't a single problem with a single fix. It's a knot tied from old stories, worn-out roles, internalized voices, nervous system noise. It's not something you overcome in a weekend. It's something you walk with, a relationship to manage, not a demon to slay. Freud would probably nod approvingly at that. He didn't believe in quick cures or miracle fixes. His model of the psyche was dynamic, layered. People weren't puzzles to be solved, but systems in motion. The self, in his view, wasn't stable. It evolved, shaped by memory, fantasy, desire, and dread. Which makes perfect sense when you consider how progress can look like total collapse right before it clicks. I've had days where I felt like I'd beaten the cycle. Woke up early, got into flow, finished a whole draft, and then the next day, back to lying on the couch, letting my coffee go cold while watching sea shanty TikToks. And here's the wild part. The more I tried to shame myself back into action, the slower I moved. It was only when I started accepting the spiral, that up doesn't always mean up, that I found any peace at all. Because once you understand that progress isn't linear, neither are you. You're not a robot, and your healing doesn't run on version updates. There's a psychological concept called self-efficacy, your belief in your ability to handle challenges. Not your ability itself, but your belief in that ability. And the funny thing is, that belief doesn't grow when you succeed every time. It grows when you fall down and get up again. When you realize the spiral didn't kill you, that you're still here, still trying. You grow by shedding who you used to be. And sometimes, who you used to be was someone who needed procrastination to feel safe. Freud had this idea called regression, where the mind, under stress, reverts to earlier patterns of coping. We see it in ourselves every time we delay a scary task with childhood tactics. Napping, avoiding, faking illness, pretending not to care. And when I realized that my procrastination was sometimes a form of emotional regression, it made sense why certain tasks felt so impossible. I wasn't a grown adult trying to work. I was an overwhelmed kid trying to escape being judged. So now, when I feel the spiral coming, I pause. I ask, who's running the show right now? And if it's that kid version of me, the one who feared disappointing everyone, I try not to shove them away. I invite them in. I say, hey, you're safe now. We got this. It sounds cheesy. It works anyway, because that's what healing actually is. Not constant forward motion, but learning how to be with yourself in the moments when you stall. When the spiral tightens. When the ghosts come back. It's in those moments that you prove to your nervous system, we don't need to hide anymore. There's still open academic debate around the permanence of behavioral change. Can people really rewire these patterns long-term, or are we always managing them in cycles? Freud would say, we don't erase parts of ourselves. We integrate them. The goal isn't to become someone who never procrastinates. The goal is to become someone who understands what their procrastination is trying to say. I've stopped calling myself a procrastinator, not because I never procrastinate, but because the label was starting to become a prophecy. Now, I say, I have a tendency to delay when I feel vulnerable. That's not an identity. That's a pattern. Patterns can change. Healing also looks like giving yourself credit for things others can't see, like opening the tab, like writing one awkward paragraph, like not checking your phone for 20 whole minutes. These small acts, they're resistance. They're quiet revolutions. One of my favorite tricks now is the restart. When I find myself deep in avoidance, I don't wait for the clock to strike a new hour or for some sacred, productive mood to descend. I just restart. Right there. Mid-scroll. Mid-shame spiral. I close the tab. I breathe. I begin again. Because healing isn't about momentum. It's about permission. Permission to fail. Permission to return. I used to be afraid that if I let myself off the hook, I'd never get anything done. But the truth? Compassion got me farther than self-flagellation ever did. Shame gave me quick compliance, but no staying power. Gentleness gave me sustainability. And I don't care what the hustle culture podcasts say. You are allowed to be messy and still be moving. You are allowed to have a bad week and still make something beautiful. You are allowed to spiral and still come back. You don't have to erase your past to build your future. You just have to carry it more kindly. So if you're healing right now, whether that looks like writing again or just thinking about writing again, know this. You're not behind. You're not late. You're not broken. You're spiraling. And spirals still move forward, even when they loop. Even now, especially now, you're becoming someone new. I sat there, staring at the blinking cursor like it owed me money. The document was open, the notes were ready, the idea was alive, but I wasn't moving. Not frozen. Just paused. Quietly paralyzed. And instead of panicking, I asked myself something I never used to ask. What if this isn't a flaw? What if this is a message? What if procrastination isn't laziness or defiance or disorganization? What if it's a signal from the deepest part of you? A flare fired by your unconscious saying, I'm not ready yet, and that's okay. Freud didn't believe the unconscious was a saboteur. He believed it was trying to protect us in its own odd, cryptic, inconvenient way. And when you really sit with that idea, when you stop trying to overpower procrastination and instead start listening to it, everything softens. It stops being the villain in your story. It starts being the guide. I spent years in battle with myself. Every delayed email, every unfinished project, every missed opportunity, I wore them like scars. I thought something was wrong with me. But the more I looked, the more I realized procrastination isn't the problem. It's the language of the problem. And if you decode it, it'll tell you exactly where the wound is. Sometimes it says, I'm scared. Sometimes it says, I don't believe I deserve this. Sometimes it says, I don't know who I'll be if I finish this. And sometimes it says, I'm tired. Not just today tired, decade tired, life tired. And you know what? That's valid. There's a strange comfort in realizing you're not broken. You're just communicating with yourself in a different dialect. The language of delay. The body language of stillness. And instead of bulldozing through that with coffee and guilt, I've started translating it. Oh, I'm avoiding this because I care. I'm hesitating because I want it to go well. I'm frozen because I'm afraid of the next version of myself. That's not failure. That's honesty. And honesty creates movement. There's open academic debate about whether procrastination can be entirely eliminated or whether it's just something we learn to manage. Freud, I suspect, would laugh at the idea of elimination. He'd say, human nature doesn't vanish. It integrates. It adapts. It matures, but doesn't disappear. You'll never not be tempted to delay. You'll never fully silence the voice that says, do it later, but you can get better at answering it. Not with anger, but with curiosity. I've started asking, okay, what would it look like to do just 5 minutes? Often, that's enough. Because once I begin, I remember why I cared in the first place. The hardest part of doing anything meaningful is the beginning, not the doing, not the finishing, the starting. Because that's where you leave the safety of fantasy. That's where you cross the line between intention and action. And it's not supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be human. You're allowed to struggle. You're allowed to sit still for a while. You're allowed to be a work in progress without becoming a cautionary tale. What changed everything for me wasn't a new routine or another planner. It was grace. The day I said, hey, this part of me, the avoidant, awkward, uncomfortable part, it's not the enemy. It's part of me. And it gets a seat at the table. Not the head seat, but a seat. Because the goal isn't to destroy procrastination. It's to understand it, to work with it, to recognize its signals, to respond with care, not cruelty. You're not lazy. You are not failing. You're not weak. You're scared, yes. Hopeful, maybe. Stuck, probably. But you're still here. Still listening. Still trying. And that's what matters. So maybe you're not broken after all. Maybe you're just learning to speak your own language. And learning to listen when you whisper instead of scream. If you need a break, take it. If you need to cry, let it. If all you can do today is open the document and stare at the cursor, then that's where you start. No drama. No scum. Just start. Because your future self isn't waiting for the perfect version of you. They're waiting for any version of you who's willing to take the next, smallest step. And I promise you, they'll be proud. So here we are, friend. We've walked through a spiral, not a straight line. From the first moment of avoidance on the couch to the strange, quiet tenderness of realizing procrastination wasn't your enemy. It was a translator, a messenger from somewhere deeper. The voice of the parts of you that weren't ready yet. The parts that still needed to be heard. Freud, for all his flaws, understood this one thing with eerie accuracy. The human behavior is rarely what it seems. That a delay isn't just a delay. That putting something off isn't always about laziness, but about longing and fear and resistance dressed up in comfort. And sometimes it's just the nervous system saying, please, not yet. You've met your inner child, your ego in turn, your superego judge. You've seen the ID throwing tantrums and the dreams that distract and inspire. You've seen the quiet rebellion under the surface of to-do lists. And most importantly, you've kept going, even if it was just in thought. Even if your only action today was reading this far. That's not nothing. That's everything. Healing isn't linear. Neither are you. You're built in layers, memories, patterns, and pauses. And the next time you find yourself frozen at the start of something meaningful, may you remember, you're not failing. You're listening. You're translating. You're about to begin again, not as a better version of you, but as a truer one. So wherever you are, morning, night, in the thick of it, or just waking up from it, may you go gently, may you go honestly, and may you go forward one imperfect step at a time. You're not behind. You're becoming.